Welcome to, good morning, everybody. If that didn't wake you up, I hope the next bit of this presentation will. Welcome
Bywater's that one.
to JNUC 2024. This is the Practical Mac Security Talk from Carrie and Matt. They'll introduce what they do and everything else, but this is a great talk. Just note, like any other talk, there will be a time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. I'll be running around with the mic to field your questions, so just put your hand up and then we can get that. So get the questions and everything in the Q&A on film, okay? So thanks very much, and Matt and Carrie, please come out.
Thank you. Awesome. Everyone, this is Carrie's water, and that's my water, in case anyone else heard that. Yeah, water. Yeah, it's mostly water. It's fine.
Good morning. Welcome to today's session where we're going to cover practical Mac OS security. So I'm Carrie. I'm a product owner on the Mac OS Protect security portal. I've been at Jamf for about 3 years. I've worked in this space the entire time. I work with Matt and our development team to bring product updates and enhancements to fruition. I've learned a lot over the last few years, and I'm excited to share with you some security-related insights you can take back to your organizations.
My name is Matt. I'm the product manager. There we go, that's me. Product manager for Mac endpoint security here at Jamf. That translates mostly to Jamf Protect, but kind of some influencing into some other areas like Jamf Pro. It's my job to interface with all of you in the crowd as much as possible and help Jamf understand where we should be going next. What are our customers most concerned about? What's the threat landscape look like? How can we best help you protect your endpoints in your environment?
So in today's session, we're going to look at what security looks like for Mac OS, provide insight into what you need to be aware of and why it matters. Be aware this is an introductory overview. Our intention with the information is not to invoke fear, but to educate you and help you become more informed. Also know that what we're going to talk about is not an exhaustive list, but solid considerations that you can consider for your Mac OS security journey. We'll explore some attack vectors and what information and tools are available for you to enhance your security posture. And you'll leave our session today with a better understanding of what endpoint security, knowledge about how you can leverage tools to prevent bad actors from accessing your fleet, and practical steps you can take to reduce security risks for your organization. First, we want to look at what our threat landscape looks like from a big picture view. Consider this. When employees work from home, it creates a security landscape that needs to be accounted for more than ever compared to when everyone worked in the office. These increased risks include things like weak passwords, insecure home or public Wi-Fi networks, unencrypted file sharing, additional attack surface created by employees working outside of traditional firewalls and accessing organizations' sensitive data. Endpoints have become the new edge, carrying a new level of risk because of remote working, plus a move to more and more cloud-based business applications where data lives.
All right, and we can kind of focus in a little bit on what the threat landscape looks like specifically for Mac. For a long time, there was this perception that Macs are immune to viruses or malware or don't get them. And while that was never true, certainly as Macs weren't super common in business for quite some time, it was largely the case just because it wasn't a large enough an interesting enough attack vector for threat actors. But that has changed. You saw in the keynote yesterday, John talk about the massive increase of the market share that Apple is taking in desktop computing. Effectively, what that means is the footprint for Mac is growing in the enterprise. And while some threat actors do operate for espionage purposes or hacktivism, for example, the vast majority of threat actors are still financially motivated. So if you're a threat actor, you're effectively functioning as a business, right? You want to generate the most income for yourself with the least amount of effort. So you're often looking at where you can have the most bang for buck. So as that footprint grows, so too does the focus from threat actors. To the point where now, as of this year, we're tracking hundreds and hundreds of different macOS malware families. That's from our Threat Labs team, and even just this year, we're actually tracking more new malware families in 2024 than previously in 2023. So it is continuing to grow. It does tend to go up and down throughout the years. Over the last 5 years, it's gone more up each year than down, but it does depend on kind of what's happening in the industry at the time. Typically, Mac malware threats, even as they have grown, up until maybe the last 5 years, were mostly focused towards kind of not as aggressive things like adware. And that's malicious advertising, basically, where you'll find that you'll click a link and be taken to a different place in a browser that you didn't mean to. Often can be achieved by a browser extension that you didn't know was actually installed. Certainly a little bit more innocuous than some of the more dangerous strains of malware, but it can be impactful for the end user experience. It can scrape information from your system, which can lead to kind of more severe consequences for an organization. But overall, while that has been the trend in the past, that actually is changing. We are seeing more and more Mac malware families that we're discovering being more aggressive, more dangerous strains. Really commonly is cryptojacking. So still not at the very top end of dangerous, but typically using your machine's resources to mine cryptocurrency without your knowledge. We see a lot of info stealing malware, particularly in the last year on Mac, which is malware intended to essentially scrape as much information off your system as possible, looking for often sensitive information. Tends to be the real target, coming in kind of many different forms. That might be corporate information that you might be storing in your notes file, for example, iMessage databases, all the way through to your SSH keys, your AWS credentials on the system, or even your local keychain, which once it's off your system can actually be pretty readily cracked without a whole lot of effort. This data can either be then used for a downstream breach of your organization or sold to a data broker where it can be then used by other threat actors who are purchasing that. We see a range of kind of potentially unwanted applications. That's very common on Mac. We see commodity malware, which is threats that are often available as a service. So you can essentially subscribe and kind of buy a piece of Mac malware from a vendor that provides it as a service. We typically see this sort of thing, not so much on Mac, but just in general with ransomware as a service. And then we go all the way through to advanced and persistent threats, which typically is a kind of handcrafted, purpose-built malware that often is actually used for a single environment and sometimes a single highly valuable user within that environment. Common entry points that we see are malicious advertising in a browser, so clicking on something and again being taken somewhere else that you wouldn't expect, or downloading something. Torrented apps is another big one. Especially in the last couple of years, we've seen that be a really common infection vector, where you'll download what you think to be a cracked Photoshop app, for example, and it will actually contain something that's a little bit more malicious than that. One really common one that we're seeing at the moment is from nation-state actors spear phishing people, particularly on LinkedIn, either for kind of like investment opportunities. If they're targeting a financial firm, you say, you can go invest in this company, here's a special brief about that company with a malicious PDF, or spear phishing for a job opportunity, which is something that we're seeing the DPRK or North Korea actually engaging with a lot. And there was actually a recent, might be even on there. If it's not, if you go to the Jamf Threat Labs blog, you can read kind of all about it and some advisories that the FBI was giving out about that particular attack vector. So then if we're looking at how we defend against this kind of rapidly evolving and rapidly maturing threat landscape, one of the most important and fundamental things that we look at is endpoint hardening. And hardening can kind of take a couple different shapes. You can harden your environment, you can harden your endpoints, you can harden your software, but we're going to focus just on the endpoint today. And when we say hardening, we're talking about effectively making the device less vulnerable, making it ideally more expensive to compromise, more expensive to breach than the devices next to it. Right? So if we take a look at most threat actors who are still mostly financially motivated, they want that highest bang for buck, right? The highest input from, or like the highest output from the lowest input. So if you take a look to the person to your left and to your right, your job is to become more expensive to breach than the people either side of you. That's kind of what we're talking about. That's the way I tend to think about it. Ideally, we want to introduce as many opportunities for prevention as possible, right? Whether that is preventing a piece of malware from running, or it could just be you prevented a user from clicking a phishing link because you trained them or you implemented a control that they weren't able to click that link. But if we can't do that, security is a never-ending game. There's no silver bullet, right? You wouldn't all be here if there was. We want to introduce as many opportunities for detection as possible so we can investigate, disrupt, mitigate, and kind of reduce the impact of a threat. And so there's some kind of key things that we can go through to do that. First of all, we'll look at the concept of attack surface reduction, or reducing your attack surface where you're vulnerable, implementing advanced threat protection, kind of targeting the more, some of the more common malware strains, but also some of the more targeted things like the spear phishing that we were talking about earlier. And then discussing how we can accelerate your investigations in the case where we have missed something, we have had a breach, how can we investigate, contain, mitigate, and recover. We'll look at how we can reduce the attack surface. And essentially what we're talking about here is looking at all the different entry points that an attacker might use to gain access to your environment, or in this case, the device. So we're typically looking at, and most commonly looking at, things like the hardware interfaces on the device, like how can a user plug something in, whether it's storage, whether it's keyboard, how can they get a physical connection to that device. The software that's running on it, any vulnerabilities that might be present in the software, but also the behaviors of the software. Maybe the software is able to actually do something on the system because it has unbalanced privileges on the system. Maybe it can download something to a certain directory that you actually don't want it to be able to do, so you might want to investigate that. The configuration of the device is another one. It's a bad example because AirDrop is a really, really, really good tool, and a lot of organizations use it, but AirDrop is a great way to exfiltrate data from a system that most tools will miss. Right, so it's important that we kind of look at the full scope of what the user can do on the system, but what software can do on the system as well. Identity is another big one. What user accounts exist on the system, what level of access they have, what permissions, what credentials, how those credentials are stored, who has those credentials. MFA is a really kind of important way to mitigate that risk. But we are seeing MFA spoofing be particularly common these days. So again, there is no kind of silver bullet. And there's many others, and these are just some of the examples that we're able to kind of walk through today a little bit.
So here are some things to consider and implement to reduce your attack surface. Platform app security is leveraging tools that macOS has that include XProtect, Gatekeeper, and notarization. Knowing and managing your devices by using a mobile device management software so that you know who has what devices, what software and applications are on the devices, where they are in the world, what they have access to, et cetera. Secure configuration, configuring your Macs in a way that reduces vulnerabilities to unauthorized access, data breaches, malware, and other threats by applying security best practices. Usually those are in line with an organization or industry standards or frameworks such as CIS, which is the Center for Internet Security, which is a globally recognized best practices organization for securing IT systems and data. Block risky apps by managing which applications are allowed to execute on a system, so unauthorized malicious software is prevented from running, ensuring that only trusted applications can be used. Block risky websites by preventing users from visiting websites that may pose a security threat. Types of websites may host malicious content, facilitate phishing attacks, or distribute malware. Patch your software by ensuring your software in your environment has the latest vulnerabilities patched and any new security measures added to combat emerging threats, in addition to any software patches they have for bug fixes or performance enhancements. Enforce least privileged access by granting users, applications, and systems only minimal level of access needed to perform their tasks. This reduces potential damage caused by accidents, malware, or malicious insiders because their access to sensitive data and resources is limited. And finally, controlling hardware devices by managing, restricting, or monitoring the use of physical devices like a USB storage device to connect to computers or networks, which helps prevent unauthorized data access, data exfiltration, malware infections, or other security threats. For the purposes of our discussion today, we're going to explore each of these 4 topics more in depth. The reason why we're focusing on these topics is because the information you'll learn in the session today are things that you can take away as actions that are more out of the box. You can immediately consider for review and implementation in your own environments. The other 4 require deeper knowledge, layers of implementation across other teams, and have more overhead. You can find more information about these in other sessions or with further research. First, I'm going to start with the Mac OS, the built-in security features. They provide a good foundational protection against some common malware strains. Gatekeeper ensures only trusted software runs on users' Macs. Notarization is a malware scanning device provided by Apple, and XProtect is the built-in antivirus technology. So together, they prevent launch or execution of malware. They block malware from running on customer systems and remediate malware that executed. But things to be aware of is that this is not comprehensive and is mostly focused on really common adware and malware, which is why you should consider overlaying it with additional security tools to reduce security risks, incidents, or breaches. macOS security tools can also be somewhat of a black box. It's difficult to know how they work. Therefore, it may be hard to understand their capabilities and limitations, but also bringing this back around that they're still really powerful tools. The gatekeeper notarization, especially with our macOS 15 that just released, has enhancements that prevent users from disabling Gatekeeper via command line and prevent users from overriding Gatekeeper for downloaded files.
Moving on to content filtering or acceptable use policies. These are commonly kind of looked at as an IT exercise, and they certainly are, just ensuring that your corporate devices only have access to web locations that they should. But the other really important security use case here is that we want to block access to risky web locations. So not necessarily places where they're guaranteed to find malware, or not necessarily an address that's definitely going to drop a second stage payload, but places where we are more commonly seeing risk introduced, right? So when you look at, should this device be able to access this just from a corporate use policy perspective, but if they do, they're more likely to encounter something risky, why would we allow that user to have access? Another use case is blocking data exfiltration. And here we can look at the introduction of Gen AI into all of our environments and all of our use cases. That's ramping up, that's speeding up. But also just users accessing ChatGPT and plugging in their sensitive corporate data into that tool as well. You can actually implement a content filtering policy to stop them doing that sort of thing. A lot of the examples that you'll see on the screen, like obviously we're product people for Jamf Protect, so we're going to frame this discussion through that product. But the principles that we're talking about apply for any other security tool that you might be using. Protect has a bunch of kind of pre-built content filtering policies that you can implement, looking at things like gambling, adult content, social media as well is another one for phishing. We particularly see social media employed as a part of kind of social engineering techniques. Third-party app stores for mobile, and as I said, Gen AI, ChatGPT, or kind of other tools. You can also use custom blocking, so you can kind of benefit from what Jamf and our Threat Labs team are defining as risky or kind of not ideal, but you can also build and define your own policies that you want to take across as well. Patching software is another really big one, and we talked a little bit about it in the keynote yesterday. When we look at initial infection vectors and kind of where the most risk is, patching or vulnerable software tends to be kind of number 3 on that list pretty consistently. Credentials, whether they're stolen, leaked, or given, tend to be number 1. Hackers want to simply log into an environment when they can. It's a lot easier than crafting something to hack in. Phishing tends to be number 2, and a software vulnerability tends to be number 3. And often these 3 could all exist in the same attack chain, right? That's not to say they're all exclusive, but vulnerable software does continue to pose a really high risk. Verizon actually, we collaborated on a security report with them earlier this year, and they found vulnerability exploitation in software has actually tripled in how frequently it's being used in successful breaches. The way I think about that and how I define that risk in my mind is that software is the interface typically between a user and the internet and all the things that they can access on the internet, being positive and good and productive, but also all the risk that comes with that. And as I said, it's not just about necessarily a vulnerability. It can be like what the application has access to on the system, what it can do, and how that can be used nefariously by an insider threat. But typically, it is the vulnerabilities and the exploitation of those vulnerabilities that we are concerned about. On the screen there, you'll see we have the vulnerability management feature in Protect, which is fed by your Jamf Pro inventory data. So every time your Macs run inventory on Pro, they submit a full list of installed apps. You can broaden that scope to be more than just the applications directory. And then all of that app data will then feed into the Jamf protect vulnerability management feature and give you scoring. We run a bunch of algorithms to help us understand what version it is, where it's installed, and then we can run that against some public databases that are maintained by threat researchers, maintained by some federal governments like the US. CISA has the kind of known exploited vulnerabilities database. And then we can tell you where you carry your most risk with your apps that are actually in your environment. We'll give you visibility into things like how many devices are running that app, but also things like the severity of the vulnerability. Like you might have a single user that's running an app that has a vulnerability of score of 10, right? But you might have 1,000 users running a vulnerability that is a 9. The 10 is higher, but you've got 1,000 users using that 9, so you might prioritize the patching and remediating that 9. We'll also tell you whether there's available exploit code. That's another really big one. Exploits are really expensive and really difficult to craft for the very first time. Once they become known, and particularly because threat actors will watch what other threat actors will do, and they'll dig in to understand what exploits they're using and try to adopt them. Once they become known, the cost and the barrier of entry of using an exploit like that just completely plummets. So as soon as there's known exploit code, it becomes really, really critical to patch that vulnerability because you can count on a threat actor is already deploying that out.
So user curiosity and insider threats might be a first line of risk to your fleet. Previous research says that 50% of people who find a USB device inserted into their computers, and it's usually curiosity, they're just trying to figure out who it might belong to. But there have been social engineering attacks where a bad actor has placed those purposefully to introduce something malicious into a corporate environment. Reduce the risk of introduction of malware introduced by external threats or data exfiltration by internal threats by implementing device controls that prevent or restrict use of mass storage devices in your environment. In the event a USB device is used to try and execute software, if your organization's policy is to limit these devices to read-only, it will prevent any processes that might be on the device from running. A read-only policy will also prevent someone from moving sensitive data to the device. When a device control policy is implemented in your environment, if a user tries to use a device that is against policy, an alert shows in the Jamf Protect macOS security portal with details on the event so you can look into it further, as well as rest assured no malware was introduced nor was any data exfiltrated from your environment. As you can see here, we've got an alert that scrolls, and I'll apologize, the screen is not, it's a little bit blurry, but you can see that there's alert data. The admins can use metadata such as a serial number, product ID, or encryption state to inform device control policy, whether you want to allow or deny use of USB devices more generally or make exceptions for certain device types by their serial number or by a product ID. And then moving along to the next section, we are going to look at what can be implemented to prevent more advanced threats in your environments. The 3 key types of blocking mechanisms for more advanced threats are blocking web-based threats by protecting users and networks from threats encountered while browsing on the internet. Blocking malicious software is preventing malicious software or untrusted, unsafe applications from being installed or executed on systems within a network. And block malicious behavior by detecting and preventing actions or activities within the system, network, or application that are deemed harmful, suspicious, or unauthorized.
So we'll start with web threat prevention, or the blocking of malicious web traffic. It's one half of the kind of web protection area within Jamf Protect. The other piece is the web content filtering that we mentioned earlier. One of the ways that a user can interact with this is that, yeah, if they try to open a browser and navigate to a website which is classed as malicious, yeah, they can be blocked from doing that. But it's operating outside the browser. It actually operates at the network layer on the system using kind of managed DNS within macOS and within mobile platforms as well. And what that means is that we're offering protection against this malicious traffic no matter where it's originating from, either on the device or the kind of external location. So that means it can be in a browser, it can also be in iMessage, email, WhatsApp, Adobe Photoshop, whatever it might be. It's a really effective way to stop, even if you happen to have something on your system by that point, you can prevent kind of further command and control traffic so that the actual malware might not be able to get its next stage payload to do something. You might be able to stop the distribution of the malware from ever occurring. So say the user actually does click a phishing link, for example. As we said on the keynote, that is still kind of like the weakest link in defenses. Users are still responsible. And it's not their fault, right? IT security is very hard, and we need to support them, but users are still the weakest link. So if a user does manage to click a phishing link, for example, that will often take them to some sort of distribution address, and we can actually block that address and stop the malware ever actually reaching the device before we even need to rely on any on-device detection or prevention. Data exfiltration, again, is another one that we can come back to. Even if you do manage to get something on the device, even if it does manage to launch, you can actually prevent the exfiltration of data or files or whatever it might be by the threat actor off of the system out to their collection network. Threat actors get really creative in this area. Historically, we'd see them rely on either their own kind of on-prem infrastructure that they'd spin up and stand up for each campaign and kind of rotate the addresses or the domains. Now we've seen them kind of migrate to using cloud-based services like Google Drive or even Telegram and things that you wouldn't commonly associate with distribution networks. They're getting really crafty, and they're trying to blend into as many of the corporate services and network traffic that you're using in your environment. So the threat intel provided by a team that's really looking at Apple-focused threat actors becomes really critical so that we can look at what they're typically doing to help block those sorts of things in your network. If you are running web protection, web threat prevention in this case, as we saw with content filtering, there's a bunch of kind of pre-built capabilities that you can rely on. And if the user were to navigate to something that was blocked inside that browser, this is the sort of page that they would typically see. Now moving back onto the device, kind of looking at any executable or any software running on the device, we can rely on that threat prevention feature within Jamf Protect. It is our anti-malware, our antivirus capability, built off of signature-based detection. And we're looking at a whole range of threats from those potentially unwanted apps, more common commodity malware that might be part of a subscription service even sometimes, all the way out to APTs to kind of purpose-built, handcrafted malware that might be just for you in your organization. There's a couple things that set us apart that are really important for kind of having comprehensive protection. Covering known malware typically is actually pretty easy. There's a bunch of public signature feeds that people can subscribe to for free sometimes, but also as a paid service. VirusTotal is one that you might know, where you might be uploading samples or doing some analysis through that. They actually sell a subscription feed of all the signatures that they process through their system. So a lot of vendors will just kind of get that, count that as, great, I've got my signature feed, I'm covering known malware. The problem with that is that signatures are very volatile, and some signatures, or like not every signature is equal. Which means like a file hash, for example, which is our kind of, there was some Threat Labs talks about this already this week. A file hash is basically a fingerprint for that exact version of that file. Very effective. We can calculate it on any system that has the hashing algorithm present, but it's trivial to change. You can add a single byte to a file and it will change that file hash, and now you won't be necessarily protected against that. So that's where a lot of vendors will actually stop. They'll have that big long list of kind of predetermined bad files, and then great, cool, off to the races. We also implement a couple of others which kind of take us a step above. Team ID, which some of you will know as the developer signing ID that Apple provides software developers building apps for their operating systems. We can block by Team ID, which means anything that is signed by that developer will be not allowed to execute. When it tries to spawn that process, we'll run all of our scans. We scan at runtime, which means they're really efficient. We don't bog down the system where we don't need to. And we can say, hey, it was signed by that developer. Sometimes it might be a known malicious developer that will block. Maybe sometimes Apple has already blocked it with notarization as well. There are cases where that hasn't been the case. But it could also be a developer that has actually had some riskier applications, some PUPs or some PUAs before, where it might be okay, but chances are you don't want it running in your environment. So we take a pretty aggressive stance in that area as well on behalf of our customers. We can then step up to Yara, which for any kind of pro admins in the room, the way I like to think about Yara is that it's effectively a smart group for looking at properties within code. So you can use a Yara rule where you can say, it has to have this property, this property, this property, or this and this. Like it's kind of an if-or criteria. And that allows you to pattern match across any software, any sample of malware that you want to run that against. It's a really effective way to do two things: reliably detect and prevent malware that might have had changes made to it either at runtime or has obfuscation or anti-analysis techniques built into it. Or it allows you to actually identify malicious properties that could be used across completely unrelated families of malware. But you can still reliably say that piece of code right there, no matter what way you bend or twist it, is malicious. It shouldn't be allowed. I'll block anything that's going to run on my system that has that. Again, if anyone kind of came along to the other Threat Labs talks, we cover that a little bit more, and I think you'll be able to see the recording. There's a ton of really interesting stuff that we can do with Yara, and it's really powerful for known and unknown malware. What this looks like, just as an example on the system, we'll see this user's tried to bring a malicious executable into their environment. Apple does a great job with Gatekeeper, even on 14, of saying, hey, we don't know what this is, you're not allowed to run it. Right-click and open, you can bypass that. On 15, you can't do that anymore. You need to go to system settings to bypass it, but you can still bypass it, right? So if you have a determined user, they will do that. Threat actors have a really, unfortunately, common and frustrating technique where they'll give you a DMG, you open that DMG, and the background of the DMG will literally be a set of instructions on how to bypass Gatekeeper to guide the user doing it. I wish I should have put a screenshot in it. We see it all the time. Apple actually has some detections of those now because it is so common, but it is frustrating how effective that can be. In this case, we matched it, we blocked it, we quarantined it. We then look at the alert that comes into the system. We can see that that action was prevented. And we actually recently also updated our malware prevention alerts to bring in a lot more intel about the malware family and about the sample as well, to help you understand and kind of go about your investigation and help you understand really the severity of the threat. We'll tell you, is it adware? Is it a APT Trojan? Is it spyware? Whatever it might be, we'll tell you the threat class. We'll give you some information on the family. We'll give you the link for the sample, and so you can go and check if anyone else would have caught it on VirusTotal. We'll also give you some other VirusTotal links for other samples from the same family. Like, we're trying to empower you with even just some of the kind of broad information our Threat Labs team is using to track all these threats, so that we can help people be more informed and more enabled on your own investigations as well.
In addition to keeping unwanted applications out of your environment, living off the land attacks involve threat actors leveraging legitimate software and tools that may already be present on the system to carry out their attacks. Instead of introducing custom malware, attackers exploit administrative tools, scripts, or system utilities built into the platform to stealthily execute their objectives. It could be an application that was installed knowingly by the user that is otherwise benign, or it could be something that is intentionally hidden from the user during installation to mask its being there. When malicious behaviors can be blocked, admins no longer have to chase down and stop behaviors that were alerted upon. It's simply configured, deployed, and maintained as a part of threat prevention. Alert investigation and response is significantly reduced because the malicious behavior was prevented. Steps can be taken to remove the malicious program from the machine. This type of feature is an excellent example of how layering security measures play out. If there's not a device control in place and someone was able to successfully introduce a program or file with hidden malware on a Mac via an external storage device, a feature like advanced threat controls would prevent the malicious behavior from happening. Here we see what an alert looks like when a reverse shell, which is a living off the land technique, tries to execute and is subsequently blocked. You can see this alert is related to the advanced threat controls functionality. It's in a prevented status. It has details around what happened on the endpoint. The reverse shell is prevented, and the attacker is not able to call back to their malicious server from this device.
Cool. And lastly, we'll talk about, for whatever reason, there is no silver bullet, something's happened, and we want to investigate what happened on the system at the time, how did we get to that spot. And we're talking about incident response investigations there. We want to identify, analyze, and mitigate the security incident. The goal is to understand the full nature and the scope of the threat, only then can we really start to minimize its impact and implement measures so that we don't see this again. Overall, with the goal of kind of increasing our resiliency long term. It's easier than it sounds. Really digging in and understanding start to finish the sequence of an attack can be really complicated, so it's important to kind of have the expertise and the tools and the people within your organization to be doing so, or engaging external bodies who can bring that as well. We typically talk about this through our telemetry feature in Jamf Protect. And when I say telemetry, think signal, a broad array of information that's happening across the system. Threat detection is very much focused on this specific thing that happened within this specific context with this specific file or action was detected as suspicious or malicious. Signal or telemetry is much broader than that. It's all the things that sit between all those gaps. And the idea being that you can have that detection, plug it into your telemetry, but then trace back and trace forward to understand how you got to that detection and what happened afterwards. Now, with our telemetry, we provide, and I kind of went through it with the keynote yesterday, but like all information about process execution across the system, which is really where the core of a lot of what your threat hunting or investigations will reside, network connections being made, changes made to the system, persistence, things like that. We've invested a lot recently in our kind of updated new version of telemetry. If you're a Protect customer or you're looking to be, you'll be able to get hands-on with this by the end of the year. We're super excited to bring this to you, and the whole point is how can we really empower you with as much information as possible, whether it's you with your hands on the tools or whether it's your security teams, and it doesn't matter whether it's in whatever scene that you might be using. We want to bring that data into where your workflows are today. We support a bunch of different SIEM integrations, all the common ones typically like Splunk, Sentinel, Google SecOps. And we go to a lot of effort to actually not just get the data to those systems where your teams have their workflows, have their investment already placed, but we invest a lot of time in mapping our data to the data models used by those tools. So you can have a single query in Sentinel looking for all network connections made in the last 24 hours, and it can pull back network connections made from your Windows, your Mac, your firewall, it doesn't matter if they're all on the same data model. You can really streamline how your teams are able to actually use that data. So we go to a ton of effort to make sure it's as available to your teams as possible.
All right, so to wrap us up today, reducing the attack surface is implementing safeguards to reduce your attack surface and its exposure to vulnerabilities in the environment, such as leveraging built-in security, patching software vulnerabilities, and implementing device control policies. Protecting against advanced threats is implementing software to help you reduce exposure to malware and bad actors out in the world, or prevent it from executing if it does get into your environment. And finally, accelerating investigations is ensuring that you have the right data in the right place at the right time to ensure you and your teams are prepared to quickly and efficiently identify, analyze, and mitigate security incidents if they happen. Beyond simply cobbling together any number of solutions, defense in depth is more of a security paradigm to strive for when organizations are building their security plans. The core aim is to integrate various solutions into layers like a cake, where each layer is its own security tool, but also one that is either built upon or a safety net for a previous one. As a parting thought, and because we've covered a lot of ground today, if you only take a couple of things away, here it is. So macOS security is a great starting point, but as we learned today, it's foundational to the many layers of protection available. Macs can pose risk to security and compliance of an organization. Make sure you have the right safeguards in place. And software patching is extremely important to reduce risk caused by vulnerabilities. While we reviewed a lot of details on what's out there related to security and tools you can use to reduce risk, as Matt said 4 times, there is no silver bullet. In addition to what was discussed in this presentation, there are other steps that can be taken to help improve and maintain your security posture, which we've kind of talked through also at a high level. Have a plan. Make sure you have a security policy in place. Test and validate your security controls. Implement incident response procedures. Again, employees are our first line of defense. If the security tools or all the security tools and controls in the world can't stop users from simply handing out their credentials and subsequently enable access to your environment, make sure your users are aware of what security threats are out there and regularly validate they respond appropriately to them. Stay informed about emerging threats, evaluate and validate your environment is protected against them, and consider implementing a zero trust or some other access management tool. Never trust, always verify. Continuous authentication for every user, every device, and every application before accessing your resources with rights gate-based based on minimum permissions needed. Make sure that only the users have access, get the access they need.
And we have many sessions, I think more than ever, with any JNUC I've ever seen that's focused on the topic of security, which is very exciting, particularly for those of us who work in this space. Some happened yesterday, which I really encourage you to check out the recordings of. I would say if you see threat labs at all involved in any session, tune in. They get up to some really cool stuff and help you understand the why behind a lot of the tools that we build and the how. But there's plenty of other kind of foundational sessions like this one, but also some more advanced ones as well that cover not just Jamf's endpoint protection tools, right? There are some third-party ones here that are being talked about, as well as some kind of more principle-focused topics as well. That's it. Hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for tuning in. We've got a bit of time for Q&A, but we really appreciate you giving up some of your time. There is someone running around with a microphone.
Okay. All right. So we have Jamf Pro at our college. However, I'm looking at Jamf Security. You mentioned that there's a way to block certain USB drives by product ID?
Yeah. So we have a device controls feature, which essentially that. So you can, did you say block via product ID?
Well, I may have heard you wrong, by product ID. So for instance,
Yeah.
you can restrict it to name brand USB drives versus
Yes.
something I just...
Yeah, so you can kind of do it in both orders. The feature is built to be super flexible like that. You can either block everything and allow by a product ID or one of those other indicators, or you can allow everything and implement a default blocking behavior for some of those things as well. So you could say allow all SanDisk devices, but prevent anything from vendor B over here. Yeah, it's meant to be a more flexible version than some of the MDM controls that we can use through the MDM framework through something like Pro, which is kind of like external storage, allow, read-only, prevent. This is meant to be, I'm an enterprise with a more complex use case. I want to allow this group over here with just these devices. They need to be encrypted. And even if they're encrypted, they can only be, so encryption is one of the states that we can block or allow upon. 2 in 1, everyone. And we can also do things like, serial number, product ID, vendor ID even as well.
You briefly mentioned something about blocking at runtime and not bogging down the system. But
Yes.
Kind of a quick aside, just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so we're seeing the endpoint protection space evolve a little bit away from spending a lot of system resources cataloging every single file that appears on the system. A lot of that information, while it can be useful from an incident response perspective, it doesn't necessarily give you as much value as what it costs to get that. So what we do instead is when something actually tries to launch on the system, that's when it becomes an actual threat to the system. So we'll pause it, then scan the file, and that way we only scan anything that is actively trying to become a threat. That will not be enough for every organization, right? I'll straight up say that, and we are kind of looking at longer term, do we want to implement some additional capabilities around that? But in general, a huge focus for us with Protect is to try to be as performant as possible. User productivity is really the goal. And it's our job, and it's our job to work with our customers to find that balance between let's keep our users as safe as we can, while ensuring that we have the right controls in place at the right time to prevent anything malicious where we might not want it. Great question.
Can you prevent share my drive?
Share my what, sorry?
When you have one of these Silicon Macs, it
Yeah.
used to be target disk mode. Now it's a different thing.
Yes.
The name brand, whatever. But can you prevent that from happening so that somebody doesn't hook you up with a Thunderbolt 4 cable and suddenly has access to your drive?
We have looked at doing that with device controls. It's not a use case that we cover today. And someone fact-checked me on this because it's been a while. a firmware password on the Mac should stop you being able to do that. So on the target device, I think, and someone tell me if that's wrong, a firmware password I think would stop that from happening. Also having the disk encrypted is another thing, which again, we can definitely get past that if we need to, if the system is offline. But there are other ways to impact that. It is something that we have looked at doing though, and we do look at other high capacity Thunderbolt drives. That is something that we do support with device controls. It's just that exact use case is not something that we've chased yet, but let's chat afterwards. I'd love to kind of understand like how we got to the spot where someone malicious has both of the systems that they need to do that and where they wouldn't have any of those other controls in place, if that makes sense. Always looking to understand more use cases so we can understand where to take the product next. Great question. Anything else? We've got 0 seconds left. Cool. All right. Thanks very much.